This is an advertisement by BetterHelp. January arrives with a sense of expectation and change. But real change is rarely loud or dramatic.
It's noticing what no longer needs to be there. Thoughts you keep turning over even when they're not helping.
And when you live with those long enough, they can start to feel normal until you pause and see them more clearly. That's where perspective helps. Not fixing yourself, just creating space to understand what's been weighing you down.
Therapy can offer that space, a clearer view of your own patterns and what's worth holding on to. BetterHelp makes starting straightforward. You answer a few questions and they match you with a qualified therapist. If it doesn't feel right, you can switch at any time.
Whether you're into New Year's resolutions or not, working to better yourself is something everyone should do. And you don't even need to bulldoze your life to do it. Simply use BetterHelp.
BetterHelp makes it easy to get matched online with a qualified therapist. Sign up and get 10% off at betterhelp.com/restishistory. That's betterhelp.com/restishistory.
This podcast is brought to you by Carvana. Car shopping shouldn't feel like preparing for a marathon of paperwork. That's why Carvana makes buying and financing your car easy. From start to finish, search thousands of vehicles with great prices. All online, all on your time. And when you're ready, your new car shows up right at your door. It doesn't get better than that. Buy your car the easy way. On Carvana. Delivery fees may apply.
Welcome back to The Rest is History. Julius Caesar has just got his command, the sort of long-anticipated command that he wanted to bring him wealth, fame, status and power. So he's going off to Gaul to fight Asterix, Vercingetorix, and so on and so forth. And that's basically what happens, isn't it, Tom? I mean, Caesar claims that he kills 1 million people.
That's the report of Plutarch, writing a century or so later. He says that over the course of the conquest of Gaul, Caesar slaughtered 1 million and enslaved another 1 million.
So is this as true as the talking snakes in the story of Alexander the Great?
I think it's likely to be true. I mean, it's likely to derive from claims made by Caesar himself. Because this was seen as kind of glorious, bloody feats.
Yeah.
Caesar's conquest of Gaul is completely illegal under Roman law. Actually, Caesar himself had brought in a law saying that that governors of provinces shouldn't go on kind of glory raids beyond the frontiers of their provinces. That's exactly what Caesar does. He crosses the Rhine. He famously crosses the Channel to Britain. It's an incredibly bloody, brutal, ultimately glorious process. And it brings Caesar exactly what he wants. Exactly what he wants. It makes him famous. He writes his own reports.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, isn't it the Churchill thing that history will be kind to me
because I intend to write it. Yeah,
yes.
Exactly.
So Caesar does that, his famous commentaries. So he makes sure that everyone back in Rome is kept abreast of his great feats, which he reports in a tone of kind of sober modesty, which is all the more effective for that.
Yeah.
And he starts to lavish money on the people, bribing high flyers in the Senate. He recruits large numbers of legions. So that the 13th Legion, which he'll take to the Rubicon, he's recruited that in, I think, 58, 57 BC, and it's followed him across Gaul. Now, all of this, of course, back in Rome, where large chunks of the Roman elite regard him rather as AC Grayling would regard Nigel Farage. I mean, that's the kind of that's how Caesar is hated.
Right.
You know, it's how Remainers view Boris Johnson.
Yeah.
It's that level of hatred.
But hatred and fury at continued success,
and envy,
right?
and jealousy.
Yeah.
And of course, back in Rome, Pompey and Crassus still hate each other. So there's every prospect that the triumvirate will fall to pieces. It's not an official arrangement. It's a kind of shadowy, behind the scenes agreement of the kind that had always operated in Rome. It's just that these three men are so powerful that they really can basically run Rome as they want. But by 56, Pompey and Crassus are falling out, and a guy called Domitius Ahenobarbus, who comes from a kind of very distinguished senatorial family, he's a massive snob, detests Caesar, and he runs for the consulship on a ticket of cancelling Caesar's command. And so it looks as though everything is going to fall to pieces. Yeah. And Caesar can't have this. So he basically knocks the heads of Pompey and Crassus together. He meets up with them in a place called Lucca, a town which is just within his province. The triumvirate is reanimated. And by the terms of it, Pompey gets the province of Spain for 5 years. Crassus gets the province of Syria for 5 years. Caesar gets an extension of his command in Gaul for another 5 years.
Right.
So basically, those three men have divided up the most military significant provinces between them. So again, they are effectively impregnable. What then happens over the course of the following years is that alliance falls to pieces.
Well, isn't that partly because it stops being a triumvirate and it becomes a duumvirate?
Yeah.
And so Crassus, he's basically thinking, isn't he, I'm going to become the big man because I'm going to win a victory that will make me utterly unassailable against the Parthians, who are the kind of, they're basically inheritors of the Persian Empire, aren't they? And I know you'll enjoy telling everybody what happens to Crassus.
Well, so Crassus basically he's absorbed the same lesson that Caesar had, that you need conquests basically to be at the top table now in Rome. And so he gets Syria because he wants to use it as a base to attack the Parthians. It all goes horribly wrong. It's the first disastrous invasion of Iraq by a Western republic. So Crassus ends up beheaded, and it said either that molten gold is poured down his throat or his head is used as a prop in a Parthian.
It becomes a sort of
staging
Christmas
of a Greek
tree
play.
bauble type thing.
Yes, yeah.
But surely both those things are perfectly possible, Tom, aren't they?
Yeah, they are possible.
I mean,
I guess
pour the gold down first and then cut the head off, I'd say.
The story of gold being poured down the throat is one that pops up on a suspiciously large number of occasions in this period. So how accurate it is, I don't know. But that then, of course, means that one of the stools of the three-legged stool has been knocked. And a further disaster for the triumvirate, is now a duumvirate, is that Pompey had married Caesar's daughter Julia and had loved her very much. But in 54, Julia dies. So again, another kind of bond between the two men goes.
But Pompey is Caesar's elder, isn't he? Pompey is older.
No, Caesar's older, I think.
Oh, okay. So it's not it's not really weird that Pompey has married Caesar's daughter.
No, but Pompey lays claim to being the first man, the princeps.
Yeah.
He's the top dog, and everyone basically accepts that. And Caesar essentially has accepted that, Pompey's primacy. But by 54, when Julia dies, and then 53, when Caesar's, he's trying to match Pompey up with another relative of his, and Pompey says no. It's becoming evident by that point that Pompey is starting to become a bit alarmed by Caesar's power and by the large number of legions that he has. Pompey, as the governor of Spain, has a large number of legions himself, but he stayed in Rome. So he doesn't have the close personal bond that Caesar has with his legions. And I said at the beginning about how for Caesar, the bonds of citizenship are, I think, incredibly important. And I think that what he finds in the army camp and his relationship with each of these legiones, each of these levies, is that he does respond to the idea of these legions as being, the republic in arms. And he comes to see himself as someone who has a truer understanding of what the bonds of citizenship should be than the kind of what he sees as the effete schemers in Rome.
Well, that is an interesting point, Tom, because a few people... So I mentioned Edward Habsburg in the first half. He asked for our takes on Julius Caesar. He says, is he a ruthless, manipulating thug that brought down the Republic, or a brilliant soldier and lawgiver that saw the signs of the times? But you're suggesting there's a third option there, which is, there probably has elements of those two things, that Caesar is not trying, in his own mind, he's not really dismantling the Republic, but he sees himself as being truer to the spirit of the Republic because he thinks the Republic is incarnated by the army rather than the Senate. Is that right?
I don't think he'd do it quite like that, But I mean, if you think of Cromwell discovering in the New Model Army,
yes,
kind of a truer representation of
England and godliness
than say the Parliament.
Yeah, that makes complete sense.
I think there's a kind of slight parallel there, and the idea that we have of legions as distinct entities, Caesar really is the guy who develops that. So the legions, the 13th Legion, for instance, that will be a distinct entity right the way up to the 5th century. It kind of briefly gets cashiered, but then it gets revived in the civil wars under Octavian. These idea of legions as distinct entities with distinct loyalties to commanders. Caesar is the guy who really, really leverages that.
Yeah,
and Pompey has all the soldiers who followed him in the Middle East have been given their farms, so they've all gone away. So Pompey, in a way, is behind the speed with that.
But to throw forward to the Rubicon, Tom, when Caesar is standing there at the edge of the Rubicon, and we will come back to that in greater detail later, in a way, does he think that Rome is with him because the men around him are the true Rome, and that the city beyond?
I think there's a huge part of that.
Because he doesn't think he's betraying Rome, or he thinks he's being true to the vision.
There's a question here. From Max Parker. Was there any chance that the army would refuse the order to cross the Rubicon? No, there wasn't, because Caesar would not even have contemplated it if that had been the case. And Caesar absolutely makes sure that the army are with him, the legions are with him. But I think that more than that, it's the fact that the legions are with him that gives Caesar the feeling that he has the right to do what he does.
Yeah.
That it's not just about his dignitas, which doesn't quite mean dignity. It's kind of his honor, his sense of worth, the due that he's owed for his achievements, but that the soldiers share in that. And they understand this better than the kind of do-nothing politicians scheming and whining and scrapping and complaining back in Rome.
Yeah. So let's get back to the position in the years running up to the final schism. So clearly the tension is growing between Caesar and Pompey. And there's this, basically, as I understand it, what happens is that the end of Caesar's command is approaching. Yeah. And everybody knows this is going to be make or break, don't they? Because he's basically, presumably he's just terrified that he gives up his command, comes back to Rome, and he'll just get put on trial or something, or Absolutely. He'll get politically humiliated in some way that will stop him ever holding power again.
Well, the key thing is that as long as he has his command, he is immune from prosecution. So no one can prosecute him for, as his enemies see it, the crimes that he had committed during his consulship.
Right.
But they're all desperate. They're waiting for their chance to prosecute Caesar. So therefore, for Caesar, it's incredibly important that he maintains his immunity from prosecution by getting another magistracy when he ends his term of governorship. And so he wants to go straight from the governorship to a consulship. And so there's a tribune called Caelius who, in 52 BC, proposes that Caesar should have the right to run for election to the consulship while he's in Gaul. And the backdrop to this is that Caesar has just won the greatest, most extraordinary victory of his entire career, possibly in the whole of Roman military history, which is where he crushes a Gallic revolt at Alasia. And anyone who's read Asterix will remember Vercingetorix coming out and dropping his armor on Caesar's feet. That's how they portray it. And what happened at this is that Caesar is besieging Vercingetorix in this stronghold of Alasia. And Vercingetorix's Gauls outnumber Caesar's legions, but they're penned in. And then another relief army of Gauls comes. And so Caesar builds another series of fortifications to keep them out. So they're being attacked on both sides by two armies, both of which outnumber them. And somehow Caesar wins. Somehow he slaughters them all. And this essentially ends the Gallic revolt. Everyone back in Rome recognizes the astonishing scale of what Caesar's achieved. Even the Senate votes him 20 days of Thanksgiving. And this is the backdrop where Caelius is able to say, okay, we think that, Caesar's achievements are such that he should be allowed this immunity and to run for the consulship while he's in Gaul. Now, Caesar's enemies refuse to countenance this. They hate him so much. It's kind of, it's AC Grayling, AC Grayling level of hatred for Johnson or Farage or whatever. I mean, it's that.
So Boris
level
Johnson has won this battle.
Yes, he's won.
And
Boris Johnson has. Yes, exactly.
And basically, liberal London is absolutely determined they will put him on trial regardless.
So there is no compromise, and essentially, it's fought over and fought over and fought over, and there is a kind of slight echoing of that kind of Brexit deadlock. So Caelius, the Tribune, who'd pushed that through, is a friend of Cicero, who's the great orator, whose letters and speeches are essentially our major source for this period. And Caelius writes to Cicero, you know the form, some decision will be reached about Gaul, then someone stands up and complains about it, then someone else stands up in turn, and so it drags on, a long, elaborate game.
Yeah.
And the horror of the situation is that no one can see a way. It's impossible to square the circle. And the person for whom this is a particular nightmare is Pompey, because Pompey doesn't want to have to choose. Because he doesn't want to have to alienate Caesar, particularly when Caesar is potentially so dangerous. But equally, he doesn't want to lose the respect of all his new chums in the Senate, who suddenly are kind of are backing him. And in 51, Pompey comes out against Caesar and says that he should lay down his command. And he specifically says that he is going to act like a father to Caesar. So that's incredibly offensive to Caesar.
Yeah.
You know, Pompey is laying claim to the rights of a father over Caesar, his own father-in-law.
Tom, could Pompey have chosen differently? Could Pompey have thought, well, you know what? I don't want to risk civil war. I've basically got half the power. I mean, that was his great mistake, was it? He just should have carved up power with Caesar and sold out the Senate, basically.
As it turned out, that would have worked out better for him.
Yeah.
But I think that the opportunity to, well, it wasn't just to pose as as the defender of the Constitution. I mean, he believed it, even though Pompey himself had engaged in endless kind of criminal, unconstitutional actions. At his heart, he wanted the approval of the constitutionalists, and so the chance ultimately to pose as the defender of the Constitution was too big an opportunity, and so. Once Pompey has swung behind the constitutionalists, it means that no resolution is possible. So you go into 50 in December of 50 BC. One of the two consuls goes out to Pompey's villa in the Alban Hills outside Rome, and he takes a sword and he hands Pompey the sword, and he says, we charge you to march against Caesar, to defend the Republic. And Pompey takes the sword and says, I will do it if necessary. And that's when it becomes evident that, there is going to be the most almighty bust up, because now, we talked about this before, 1st of January, consuls turn over, the tribunes turn over. Tribune in 49, who comes in on the 1st of January, is one of Caesar's most decorated, most celebrated officers from Gaul, a man called Mark Antony. And so Mark Antony becomes tribune. He's Caesar's man in the Senate. And on the 1st of January, 49, Antony reads out a proposal in the Senate from Caesar that both Caesar and Pompey should lay down their command simultaneously.
That's a pretty good compromise, isn't it? Why doesn't Pompey take it?
Well, the Senate decide that this might look too favourable, that, they're so committed to destroying Caesar that they think that might make him look good. So they suppress it.
It is.
Which is again, but you can see the kind of the Brexit echo, that by pushing for total victory, they lose the chance to bank some winnings.
They go for the second referendum and
they go for the second referendum. Exactly. Yes, exactly. And so then they vote, they agree on a date by which Caesar has to give up his command, and that gets passed. Now,
right.
the role of a tribune, of course, the tribunes famously have the veto. A tribune can veto a measure. So Antony vetoes this measure. And the Senate, rather than accepting that, and, this is the idea that they're constitutionalists, they're perfectly happy to bend the Constitution when it suits their needs. They declare a state of emergency. So 7th of January, they declare a state of emergency. Antony very, very flamboyantly disguises himself as a slave, as does Caelius, as does another Caesarian tribune. They kind of hide in a wagon and very ostentatiously head off to the frontier, to Ravenna.
How can you hide ostentatiously?
That's how they did it. It's all theatre.
Right.
They make sure that everyone knows. That,
so in other words, right, okay. Yeah. So it's a performance, basically.
It's performative, I believe.
Right, yes, very good. So
so they head off to Ravenna, which is where Caesar is, with the 13th Legion, waiting for news. And there's some confusion in the sources about when exactly the tribunes get to Caesar. Some say it's after the Rubicon, some say before. But indisputed, the news reaches Caesar in Ravenna, and he basically faces this excruciating decision.
At last, we have finally reached the banks of the Rubicon. And on that note, we'll be back after the break.
This episode is brought to you by Rocket Money.
Tom, we often talk about how to organise our finances. I'm very conscious that I'm paying for a lot of mad subscriptions. And there's one thing that we've talked about often on this show. It's the thing that we probably hate more than any other, and it's a hidden fee. I would love to get my finances under control. There are all these things piling up on our bank statements, and I think I need to fix this problem. I need to sort this out and to stop this.
I mean, my finances are so chaotic that I need this app.
So I'll tell you what it is. It's called Rocket Money. It's a personal finance app that helps find and cancel your unwanted subscriptions. It monitors your spending, and it helps to lower your bills so that you can grow your savings.
With Rocket Money, you can track all of your subscriptions, and you can easily cancel within the app with just a few taps, saving you time, avoiding charges. And you can also set budgets and goals and get personalized insights and regular reports to track how you're doing. They will even send you real-time alerts for large transactions, upcoming bills, refunds, and even low balances. So let Rocket Money help you reach your financial goals faster. Join at rocketmoney.com/ishistory.
That's rocketmoney.com/ishistory. rocketmoney.com/ishistory.
So, Tom, Julius Caesar, he's there at the bank of the Rubicon, and we have had a lot of questions about this moment. So Nick R says, what would have happened if Caesar hadn't crossed the Rubicon? John O. Henkert says, what was Caesar intending to do? There's this sort of, Mark Woodhouse says, was he ever not going to cross it? What were his other options? I mean, the way you presented it suggests to me that he's always going to cross it. Not least because Sulla has already done this, right? He's already marched on Rome. So Caesar, the crossing of the Rubicon is not such an unprecedented. Is it?
So there are various accounts of it, but one person who does not give an account of the crossing of the Rubicon is Caesar himself. So Caesar writes, as he had written commentaries on his Gallic campaigns, he writes one on the Civil War as well. And the target, he goes from Ravenna to a town called Arminium. And Caesar's comment on this is he set out with his legions to Arminium. There is no mention of the Rubicon. There's no mention of the fact that he's crossed it, that he's come into Italy. So you may wonder, well, where does all this stuff about him standing on the banks of the Rubicon and wondering and pondering come from? And I think almost certainly it comes from a guy called Gaius Asinius Pollio, who was an officer with Caesar and with him on the banks of the Rubicon. He goes on to become a very significant cultural figure as well as political figure. So he's the patron of Virgil. He's a friend of Horace. He's a kind of Republican who stays true to that ideal right the way through his life. He kind of dies, I think, AD 4. But Pollio writes an account of this, and So Plutarch, who writes the biography of Caesar that gives the casualty figures in Gaul, he says that Caesar stands on the banks of the Rubicon and kind of ponders, and then he says, "Let the die be cast." He says this in Greek.
Okay, not in Latin.
No, so it's a quotation from Menander. Anerythokubos. Let the die be thrown. Let the die be cast. Yeah. Now, in Suetonius's account, this is translated into Latin as "Jacta alia est,"
Yeah, that's the more famous. That's
It
the
is.
most famous version, isn't it? I mean,
it is, but I see there's a question from Amy Madravadi.
Yeah.
Do we accept Erasmus's assertion that Caesar said, "Let the die be cast," and not "the die is cast"? And interestingly, so I've been doing a translation of Suetonius for Penguin Classics, and the text I've been using, the Oxford Classical text, it has "Jacta alia esto," which is "Let the die be cast." So we don't,
yeah.
whether
he
it's,
may not have
the
said
die
either.
is cast or let the die be cast. I mean, ultimately, it doesn't matter. And I think he probably did say it. I mean, because Pollio clearly remembered, or Pollio is making it up.
I mean, doesn't he have this line, Tom? That's not all he says. Doesn't he also say, where is it? Let us follow where the omens of the gods and the evils of our foes will lead us, or something like that.
Yes.
Do you think he said that?
Well, we talked about the magic snakes, didn't we? In the context of Alexander. Okay.
Yes.
Well, so I will, I'll read you my translation of that passage.
It's in
Suetonius. So, according to Suetonius, the news has reached Caesar. He affects absolute lack of concern. He attends a public festival. He inspects the plans for a gladiator school. He hosts a dinner party. And then the sun sets. He harnesses mules from a nearby mill to his carriage, and he sets off in utmost secrecy with a kind of very small retinue, heading off to the banks of the Rubicon. But his torches blow out and he gets lost. So he blunders about until the sun starts to rise again in the east. He locates a guide, and this guide then takes him to the banks of the Rubicon. And he stands there, and Suetonius says that he says, "Even now we could turn back, but once we have crossed that tiny bridge, everything will have to be decided by war." And then, according to Suetonius, a wondrous thing happens. Nearby him, a figure of remarkable size and beauty abruptly appeared, sitting and playing on a pipe. And when some of his soldiers, trumpeters among them, abandoned their posts to join the large number of shepherds who had run to listen to the music, the apparition snatched a trumpet from one of the trumpeters, leapt into the river, sounded the advance with a mighty blast, and crossed over to the river bank. And that's when Caesar says, "Let us go where we are summoned, both by divinely authored signs and by the wrongs our foes have done us. Let the die be cast, or the die is cast, as you prefer."
Yeah.
So it's an incredibly dramatic moment. And Caesar crosses the Rubicon. Civil war ensues. Pompey is defeated. All the armies of Caesar's enemies are defeated. Caesar follows Sulla in making himself dictator. He ends up, unlike Sulla, who he says Sulla was an idiot for ever having laid down his dictatorship. Caesar is appointed dictator for life. And for this, he is assassinated by the people that he has pardoned and forgiven.
So his own is it Clementia? Did you say?
Clementia, yeah.
Has come back to bite him because they feel humiliated by his pardons, don't they?
And the paradox of that is that Caesar pardons them because in that sense, he is a true republican. He doesn't want to behave like Sulla. He doesn't want to execute people. He doesn't want to, pay bounty money for heads. And so the people he's pardoned murder him as the murderer of the Republic because they're able to, because Caesar had pardoned them for impeccably republican reasons.
So do you think, Tom, that moment, so just one tiny detail, it would be an even more dramatic moment, wouldn't it, if the Rubicon was a better river than it is?
Yeah, it's a terrible river.
Because it's basically little more than it's just a stream, isn't it, really?
Yeah, so it's nobody was really sure which one it is. I guess we're still not entirely certain, but it's thought to be a river that I think until Mussolini changed the name officially back to Rubicon, but it was the Fiumicino. And I remember going to look for it, and it's incredibly disappointing. It's very, very polluted. It kind of runs through industrial zones, and it's all snagged with cans and waste. Okay, so it's called Rubier because that's it's kind of rusty red.
Yeah,
and it's kind of, even in ancient times, it had kind of iron deposits, turning it red. But now it's absolutely filthy, as I remember.
But do you think so that to cross the Rubicon in sort of modern idiom means to take a decision that changes everything, after which there is no going back? Does it change everything, though? Because
I think it does.
Do you think? But don't you think what follows is to some degree inevitable? The collapse of the Republican system and the rise of basically imperial dictatorship, or do you think it took Caesar to make it happen?
I think that had Pompey swallowed his pride and negotiated a compact with Caesar, you could imagine a kind of duumvirate.
Yeah,
I mean, they may well have still ended up fighting a civil war, but you could imagine, they wouldn't. Had Caesar's opponents been less obdurate, you can imagine him becoming consul and then kind of being embroiled back into the cut and thrust of Republican politics. So I don't think it was always inevitable. I think it was always very, very likely, and I think that the reason that you asked why do we remember Caesar and not Sulla, partly it's because Caesar's march on Rome is properly terminal for the Republic.
Yeah,
Caesar despises, is not going to do what Sulla did. But I think it's also because you have that, it's that physical idea of the river. And it's the idea that on one side of the river, you have the Republic, and on the other, you have the empire. On one side, you have freedom, and on the other, you have tyranny, or as if you prefer, on one side, you have anarchy and chaos, and on the other, you have order. And it's a kind of primal dividing line in what will become Western politics. And that's why it's remembered, because Rome does serve this primal role in the imagination of the West. It always has done. And the counterpointing of a republican system of government with an autocratic system of government, those are the kind of the great poles around which the Western political imagination has always revolved.
I think that's a really convincing argument, but it does raise one last question, which is Danny Kaye's question. If this is such a dividing line in kind of Western political imagination, as you say, between order and anarchy, or between empire and freedom, or whatever. But why is it Caesar who is so totally remembered, when the man who really incarnates that change is the man who ends up as his adopted heir, his great nephew Octavian Augustus, who is the first? I mean, Caesar is not the first emperor; Augustus is. So why is it that we remember? I mean, everybody's heard of Julius Caesar. Even people who have no interest in history at all have heard of him. And probably even a lot of people who have no interest in history have heard of the crossing of the Rubicon. But people who have no interest in history often have not heard of Augustus at all, I would say. Why do you think that is?
Because Augustus veils his power. Augustus enters a compact with the Senate that the Senate will pretend to be more powerful than it is, and Augustus will pretend to be less powerful than he is. Caesar doesn't do that. Caesar is, in that sense, a republican. He wants his glory. He wants his dignitas. He wants his fame. And Caesar is a kind of, his powers are demonic and sublime, and he has these qualities of boldness, of dash, of perseverance, of a yearning to be the best, that in a way are it's the essence of what the Republic had always been, and why the Republic had become the superpower that it did. And the subtitle of Rubicon, the book I wrote on this, is The Triumph and Tragedy of the Roman Republic.
It's a wonderful book, by the way.
And in
people who are listening who haven't bought
Dominic.
it, they should go out and buy it forthwith.
But the reason one way to define a tragedy is that qualities that under normal circumstances would be positive become negatives.
Yeah.
And in that sense, I suppose Caesar, he's a very republican figure, but it's he becomes a kind of cancer, I guess, within the body politic of the Republic. That all those qualities that had been working for the Republic turn against it.
Joe, we've got a podcast coming up on 1922, and he's like David Lloyd George. People. So Stanley Baldwin said of Lloyd George is a dynamic force, but a dynamic force is a terrible thing. And that's pretty much how the Romans think of Caesar, isn't it?
Yeah.
They recognize his qualities, but they think they're too much. He has to go. So,
Yeah.
but Augustus is a greater politician, isn't he?
Yes, Augustus is incomparably a greater politician, but Caesar is a greater man. And if we're talking about greatness in that sense, and we are suspicious of greatness. We've talked about this so many times, but Caesar indisputably, if there is such a thing as a great man, Caesar was a great man. He was a great conqueror. He was a great political leader. He was brilliant at almost everything he touched. And I think there is something terrifying and kind of demonic about it. And if we're talking about 1922, I'm sure W.B. Yeats, who becomes a senator in that year, Yeats wrote a brilliant poem about Caesar on the banks of the Rubicon, that civilization may not sink, its great battle lost. Quiet the dog, tether the pony to a distant post. Our master Caesar is in the tent where the maps are spread, his eyes fixed upon nothing, a hand upon his head. Like a long-legged fly upon the stream, his mind moves upon silence. Augustus does not inspire that kind of poetry.
Oh, from Virgil, maybe? Or Horace?
Maybe.
Anyway,
maybe.
Tom, I could listen to you talking about all this. I could actually listen to you for hours, but I recognise that people listen to this podcast while walking the dog or doing the dishes, and that nobody does the dishes for 3 hours. So we will return to the end of the Roman Republic and the birth of the Roman Empire in future podcasts. We have so many plans for podcasts about the Romans, but our path leads us later this week to 1922. And thank you very much, Tom. We will see you all in 1922 next time. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thanks for listening to The Rest is History. For bonus episodes, early access, ad-free listening, and access to our chat community, please sign up at restishistorypod.com. That's restishistorypod.com.